Hey you guys, welcome to week 2 of our series on goals, those God-sized goals. And so before we get into that, I have a couple quick things to go over. One is that next week we're going to be back here at the church, in-person gathering together. So be here Wednesday night, 6 o'clock, and then we'll start worship around 6:45. So hope you guys can be here for that. The other thing is that this weekend, on Saturday night, we're going to be hanging out, just kind of doing some fun stuff. So we're going to go grab a bite to eat at the Mexican place here in town at 6, and then we'll be back here around 7-ish just to hang out. We got a scavenger hunt, I think, planned, and some other fun games. So just come, hang out, have a good time, all that good stuff. So let's go ahead and dig into what we're going to be talking about today. And so last week we talked about goals and those God-sized goals and how sometimes those goals come out of difficulties that we find or we experience in life. And so when it comes to goals, we've all set goals. Maybe they're not these huge God-sized goals, but sometimes they're smaller goals, right? Maybe it's just to make the team or whatever it is that you're going for. Maybe it's to make this certain grade in this class or on this test, or maybe it's to impress that special someone, right, in your life. So whatever that goal is, we've all set those goals, but sometimes when it comes to goals, we find ourselves getting stuck, right? It's kind of like this. Check this video out. Let's bless that guy's heart. He was struggling, right? And that's a lot of times what it feels like for us in our own lives, that we have things going on, or we try to do something, we set a goal, and then we end up just not really doing anything good or productive in that goal. So there was a kid's book that has been out for a long time, and that book has a quote in it that I just absolutely love. It's called The Little Prince, and here's what the quote is. It says, "A goal without a plan is just a wish," right? A goal without a plan is just a wish. You see, several years ago, I had this huge goal of going to seminary, right? And for me, that goal was really just to get that master's degree. And it took a little bit longer than I had planned, but eventually, finally, I graduated, right? I learned a lot of really great stuff at seminary, and a lot of stuff that helped me be hopefully a better youth pastor. But there was a lot of difficult things too, a lot of hard stuff that I had to go through. And thankfully, I didn't have to do it all alone, right? My wife, Tori, was super helpful, encouraging. She was the one that kind of talked me down a lot of times when I was ready to quit or give up. I had Brother Jason, who was going through it at the same time too here at the church. And then Brother Kevin had already been through the program, so he kind of knew what to expect and how to kind of help me in that. So those folks really, really helped me. The church was super supportive, both financially and prayers and all that kind of stuff, just encouragement. And so I had a lot of really great people around me to help. But most importantly, right, God was there every step of the way. And when I look back, I see how God moved in those different ways. And so when it comes to our goals, right, I don't say all of those things about me getting a master's degree. I like to oh, look how awesome I am, right? Because trust me, there are several C's in my grades there. But really to say, if I can do that, then you certainly can accomplish your goals too. And you may be sitting there saying, I don't know about that, Keith Wayne, but really, if we look at the story in Nehemiah, I think he's going to really give us some encouragement and some things that can really help us in our goals. So recap real quick. Last week we started the book of Nehemiah. Takes place 140 years after the city of Jerusalem was taken over. The city walls were torn down, the temple where they worshiped was torn down, and a lot of the people, most of the people, were taken in captivity into exile. And so 140 years later, we have Nehemiah on the scene. And last week we talked about how his heart was just broken, right? He had a deep passion for wanting to help rebuild the walls there in Jerusalem. And so when it comes to this, right, he had this humongous God-sized goal, right, that was in front of him. But what about his plan, right? What plan did he have in place? So look with me, Nehemiah chapter 1, looking at verse 11, right? So we left last week talking about how Nehemiah wept and he fasted and he prayed, right? And so it records one of his prayers right there, right after verse 4. And at the end of that prayer, this is what Nehemiah says. He says, "Lord, let your ear be attentive to the prayer of your servant and to the prayer of your servants who delight in revering your name. Give your servant success today by granting him favor in the presence of this man." And then he goes on to say, "I was cupbearer to the king." And so one of the first things that we see is that in the midst of him praying, in the midst of him going to God with this God-sized goal, we see that he wasn't really given any step-by-step instructions, right? God didn't really say, you're going to do this, then this, then this, then this, then this, right? It was basically, hey, here's what I want you to do. And that was it. There was no step-by-step instructions. And so in that process, while Nehemiah was praying, he was already beginning to work out this plan of how he was going to accomplish this God-sized goal, right? He says this statement right there at the end of verse 11. He says, "I was cupbearer to the king." You see, that's really, really, really super important when we get into the story here in just a second. Because that opportunity, that resource that Nehemiah had was how God was going to use him to accomplish this God-sized goal. And so what we see here is that Nehemiah planned while he prayed. You see, a lot of times I think we just want to sit still and let God just take care of everything. But really, when God gives us something, sometimes we still have work that's to do while we're waiting on God to line things out. And so Nehemiah planned while he prayed. And so if we jump forward into the next chapter in verse 3 of chapter 2, what we see is that Nehemiah has prayed and he is planning. And in that planning process, right, he is preparing for something in really great detail, right? He's not just kind of casually going about his way. Look with me in verse 3. So the king notices that Nehemiah is sad, and this is Nehemiah's response. He says, "But I said to the king, may the king live forever. Why should my face not look sad when the city where my ancestors are buried lies in ruin, and its gates have been destroyed by fire?" So Nehemiah tells this king, right, his king, hey, listen, why shouldn't I be upset that my people, my city, my hometown, my place has been destroyed and still sits in ruin 140 years after all of this, right? And so this begins this dialogue between him and the king. And what we see here is that the king asked Nehemiah, hey, why he looks sad. And he had an answer prepared. When the king asked Nehemiah what he wanted, Nehemiah had a request prepared. When the king wanted to know how long this would take, Nehemiah had a timeline prepared. And then since the king seemed pretty open to this idea, Nehemiah also kind of had a list of, hey, here's some things that I'm going to need. You see, when the opportunity presented itself, Nehemiah took his shot, right? He was prepared for when that opportunity came up. And so Nehemiah had a strategic mind, and God used that gift that he had to plan and prepare while waiting for that opportunity, just like I was talking about. In the midst of waiting, sometimes that means that we're to be doing things in the background, ready for when God's ready to move. You see, he prepared in detail for that opportunity, and when it presented itself, the perfect moment happened, God lined that up, he was prepared to take advantage of it. So Nehemiah prepared while he planned, right? So he planned while he prayed, and he prepared while he planned. And then we get into the next part. And what we see here is that Nehemiah had a plan in place, but he needed someone to come alongside him, right? Oftentimes when it comes to these God-sized goals, I think sometimes we don't realize that, hey, we're going to need some help sometimes. And so when it came to this, he prepared for not just those that would help, but he also prepared for those who didn't want to help, right? And so what we see at the end of chapter 2 in Nehemiah is that there was some opposition that popped up against him. I'm not going to bother with these names. Y'all can check them out in verse 19. But these three guys basically came up against Nehemiah, and basically they asked him, hey, what is this that you're doing? Are you rebelling against the king, right? And Nehemiah responds this way. He said, I answered them by saying, the God of heaven will give us success. We, his servants, will start rebuilding. But as for you, you have no share in Jerusalem or any claim or historic right to it. You see, when Nehemiah came up against this opposition, these people who didn't want Nehemiah to do this, he expected that, right? He was ready for it. He expected people to oppose him. Another thing that we see here is that Nehemiah just didn't trust anybody and everybody, right? He was cautious with who he trusted. And that's a very good lesson, I think, for a lot of us to learn here too. But then we also see that he found a way around it, right? He found a way to get the right people alongside of him to help. And so Nehemiah planned for opposition, right? And when we come into these God-sized goals, it may not be a person, but it may just be Satan himself, because these are things that God's going to do, and God's going to get credit, and God's kingdom might grow out of it. And sometimes Satan is going to be the very one that's opposing us. And so we have to be prepared for that opposition when it comes. We have to be ready to defend that. So Nehemiah had this humongous task in front of him, right? To rebuild these walls. And he had everything he needed to make that happen. You see, he had access to God through prayer. He had the God-given talents, the abilities, the passions to accomplish this goal. He had the resources, opportunity, and connections that God had given him to do this. And then finally, he had other people to come alongside of him to help. And so this God-sized goal probably scared Nehemiah, just like it probably would all of us. But you see, he didn't give up, and he didn't just wait around for somebody else to take care of it. You see, Nehemiah realized that this was an extraordinary goal, but the gifts and the things that he needed to accomplish this, the tools that he needed, were just ordinary, and they were available to him. And so when it comes to God's vision that he had for Nehemiah, the skills, right, they were there in Nehemiah's hands, ready to be used. The resources were available to him, so he just simply had to get to work. You see, you and I are designed for God's God-sized goal, right? We are designed for this God-sized goal. And so for a lot of us, we may be saying, I don't know if I really have what it takes. You, just like Nehemiah, have everything you need to accomplish this God-sized goal. You see, you have yourself. That a lot of times we feel insecure. I experienced that today, this morning, that I was insecure, that I was inadequate. But then I remembered that God has designed me, He has created me, He has given me everything I need to accomplish what He has for me. You see, I have a mind, just like you do, to think, to plan, to strategize. I have a unique gift of skills and abilities and experience. I have God-given interests and passions that can be used to further and expand God's kingdom here on earth. See, we have others around us, just like Nehemiah did. You have family and friends. You have trusted adults here at the church, or maybe at school, or maybe they're your coaches. You have access to knowledge through YouTube, anything pretty much on the internet, right? You have access to influential people through social media. Like, we have the access to other people. So you yourself are a tool that can be used to accomplish this goal. You have others around you to help you do that. You have resources or things that you can be used. Maybe that's finances. Maybe that's an audience. Maybe that's influence or opportunity, right? You have something around you that can be used. And if you don't have that, there's more than likely a way for you to help obtain that. And then finally, and most importantly, you have God, right? The very one that created you, that you were made in his image, that he has given you everything you need to accomplish the goal that he has for you. You see, just like in Nehemiah, God is with us every single step of the way. And so we're never alone when it comes to this God-sized goal that he has. So God probably isn't going to give you the step-by-step or play-by-play that you need to have for your God-sized goal. But one thing is that he has designed you specifically for the goals that he has for you to accomplish in this life. So where are you going to get started building? We'll see you guys next week.